So a couple days ago, I saw a video by Healthy Gamer, and he used this analogy from electric circuits to talk about motivation. And I thought that that was a really good analogy, and I wanted to give my thoughts on it. And so today I'm going to talk about motivation and burnout. And so in his video, he talked about Ohm's Law. And Ohm's Law is this equation here, right? Where I equals V over R. And I is current, which that's just literally the number of electrons that pass through a point in a circuit per second. Voltage is the force that is moving the electrons through the circuit, and that can be thought of as kind of the pressure in a pipe. And resistance is the force that counteracts the voltage in a circuit. So, and all these three are related by Ohm's Law. And if we take this Ohm's Law and we analogize it, we can say that current is like the progress that you make in your life, or the accomplishments that you make in your life, right? So as you go through life, you accomplish certain things. And that is equivalent to the voltage that you have, right? Which is like the willpower or the motivation that you have, and resistance, which are the obstacles that you have in life. They can be either physical or mental obstacles. So Ohm's Law takes these three things and it specifies the relationship between them. So we have this current, and it's equivalent to the voltage divided by the resistance. And if we map our analogy onto this equation, we'll say that the accomplishments that you have in your life are equivalent to the willpower or motivation that you have divided by the obstacles that you have in your life. And I think most people have this kind of conception in their mind of this kind of relationship, where they know that, hey, if they have more obstacles, they're not going to accomplish as many things. And they know that the more motivated they are, they're going to accomplish more. And if you don't like the symbols, I put this into words. So if you have more willpower and less resistance, you'll have more accomplishments. So the thing I want to talk about today are two things: the motivation and burnout. So I want to talk about how not to burn out. So this will take us back to Ohm's Law, because circuits can burn out. If we raise the voltage on a circuit too high, it will actually cause the circuit to heat up. So you can do this by taking a really thin wire and connecting it to the ends of a battery, and that wire will get very hot very quickly. And so you can even make wires glow. In fact, that's what the early light bulbs were. They just have a very thin wire. You put a lot of voltage over it, and it causes it to heat up and glow. And so if you put too much voltage on a circuit, it will heat up that circuit. And what's interesting is that the more that the circuit, that the wires and the resistors heat up, the more the resistance will be. And that is a really interesting effect, because we see the same kind of thing happen in real life, right? If we get ourselves really hyped up about something, like I want to work out or I'm going to learn this martial art, and you get yourself super hyped, then we see that the resistance to accomplishing that task tends to increase. So if there are unforeseen events or obstacles that you have, right, that will impact your hype, right? And that will impact the outcome that you have. If you're super hyped about something and you're forcing yourself to try to be hyped, right? You're forcing yourself into being more excited or to be motivated than you really are. You're opening yourself up to have more negative thoughts about those things, right? You're going to have fear of failure. You're going to have internal monologue that dampens your hype. And so this equation actually gives us an idea for where burnout comes from. It actually comes from being overhyped about things, right? So controlling the voltage over a circuit, if you overvolt or overhype yourself, you're going to lead to burnout. And this leads also to another thing I wanted to talk about with motivation, which is analogized as voltage here. People think that motivation is forcing yourself to be excited about something or forcing yourself to do something, that's what motivation is. Motivation is not forcing yourself to do something. Motivation is, even though you can do that, everyone has a natural level of motivation for things. So if I want to walk into another room, the obstacles for me walking into another room is very low. I'm a relatively healthy person. The amount of energy and willpower it takes for me to walk into another room is basically nothing. And so I can accomplish that task, right? And the reason why is if I have the motivation to do it and the resistance is low enough, I can accomplish it. The same thing is true in real life. Everything that you do in life is from the motivation to do it. If you're hungry, you go eat. If you want to play, you play a game. If you want to travel somewhere, you do what's necessary to accomplish that. And in most cases, most of the things that you do throughout your life, it just feels natural. So a person who goes to the gym every day, if you ask them, do you have to hype yourself up for that? Do you have to force yourself to do that? In general, they'll say, no, it's just something I do. And that's where you want to be for accomplishing things in your life. So if we go back to burnout, right? How do we avoid burnout? Well, we don't want to force ourselves to be hyped, right? We want to do the things that we can naturally accomplish. And so if we don't want to mess with the voltage all the time, there's two other things that we can look at. We can look at our accomplishments, but if we think about that, we can't really control our accomplishments directly. You can't imagine having $1 million and just have $1 million. You can't imagine running really fast, being able to sprint, and suddenly you can sprint. So we can't control the outcomes of our lives directly. So we have to control them indirectly by learning things and doing things. And we've already talked about voltage or motivation here, that you don't want to force yourself into being motivated over things, because that leads to burnout. So the last thing that we can look at here is controlling the resistance to accomplishing things. And so we can look at wires here. And continuing our analogy, the way that you can control the resistance in a wire, and we're not going to talk about different composition of wires, because you can talk about, okay, gold wires versus aluminum wires versus copper wires. We're just going to assume the wire is made of the same kind of material and begun with that. So the two ways that you can control the resistance in a wire is the thickness of the wire. So if you have a thicker wire, you'll have less resistance, and the length of the wire. So if you have a shorter wire, it will have less resistance than a really long wire. And this makes sense because if you think about wires as like pipes, if you want to put a lot of water through a pipe, it's going to be easier to do that with a large pipe than with a small pipe. So, and if you're going to, push water through a pipe, a really long pipe is going to have a lot more resistance to it than a short pipe. So what's the analogy to the wire in our real lives? And I like to think of the wire as the universe itself. And if you think about that, you can't really control the universe itself. There's physics that exists, there is chemistry, there's biology, and we have to play by all of those rules. We can't just say, well, I don't like gravity, so I'm going to ignore it or I'm going to turn it off. We have to play by the rules of the universe. And so we can't really control the length or the width of the wire, right? Or the thickness of the wire. So it seems on the face of it that we can't really control the resistance or the obstacles that we have. So that's why a lot of people focus on what they think of as motivation. They focus on getting themselves hyped because they're like, I can't control the universe, so I'm going to control this, and that's going to give myself outcomes. But there's another thing that we can do. We can control the distance that we want to travel through the wire. And so this distance is kind of like our goals, right? So if you think of a super ambitious goal, that's like traveling a very long distance through the wire. So if you try to take all of that in and say, I'm going to be the best, the fastest runner on Earth, that's a hyper ambitious goal. And if you take all of that in, that's going to be overwhelming to you. That's going to destroy your motivation because there are both an enormous number and amplitude of obstacles that are in your way to accomplish that goal. But if you break down that goal into bite-sized chunks, it suddenly becomes more manageable. If you focus on something that you say, I'm going to accomplish this specific tiny thing, instead of thinking about 20 years into the future, I'm going to think about this goal that I'm going to accomplish for the next 5 minutes or 1 hour. You can probably accomplish that. So you pick something. So to avoid burnout, you can control the resistance by controlling your goals. And so if you pick something that is that is easy for you to accomplish, you'll find that you'll actually make progress. And there's another effect here that goes on that's really interesting because we're human beings. So human beings have this natural ability to heal themselves and get stronger. And so if you think about how a weightlifter gains strength, they gain strength by actually causing stress to their muscle, right? So someone who wants to bench a lot of weight, they don't start with a lot of weight. They don't start with 500 pounds, right? Because that would kill them. What they do is you start, right? If you're starting from the very beginning, you just start with the bar. You lift the bar, right? And you start with something that's easy to accomplish. And then what happens is you slowly increase the weight. And why does this work? A human being can actually get stronger. That's amazing. How does it work? Well, when you stress your bones and your muscles, you actually get micro fractures in your bones, and your muscles actually get I don't want to say damaged, but that's kind of the best way of describing it. Your muscles actually get damaged. And then you have rest days. And during those rest days, your body repairs the muscle and the bones. And what the body does is it essentially talks to itself and it says, hey, I went through these stresses, and in order to be ready for this kind of stress in the future, I'm going to build back a little bit stronger. And so that's how the body naturally works. And that's how a person can get stronger over time. They put a reasonable amount of stress. They don't injure themselves, but they put a reasonable amount of stress on their body and then allow their body to rest and rebuild. And so we can do this same thing with our motivation. What we can do is when you start out, you don't have much motivation. You don't have much willpower. And so what you've got to do is you've got to exercise it. And so you pick something that you can actually accomplish in a reasonable period of time, and you accomplish it. And when you do that, that actually allows you to go through stress, right? Because no matter how what distance you pick to travel, there's going to be something that you have to do or learn or accomplish. There's always going to be an obstacle. And overcoming that obstacle allows you to get a little bit stronger in your motivation. And so as you do this, as you accomplish things, you can start to widen or lengthen your horizon of thinking. So if you look at people who are professionals or who have done this for a long period of time, they start to think in terms of years or decades. Where if you try to do that in the beginning, you try to plan things out for decades, it's going to be overwhelming and you're going to be completely demotivated. But if you start out with just minutes or hours and start accomplishing things, you'll find that your motivation and your willpower increases, and you'll start to be able to think about things over longer term horizons. And when you can do that without it overwhelming you, you start to say, okay, let's think about tomorrow, right? We'll plan not just for today, we'll plan for tomorrow. And then you start planning for multiple days, and then you start planning for the week and multiple weeks. And it won't overwhelm you anymore. You won't be demotivated. You'll actually be able to handle this sorts of things. And so that's my advice for this kind of thing of how to prevent burnout, right? You pick goals that you can actually accomplish. You start very small and you build your tolerance. You build your willpower and motivation over time. And it may sound kind of weird that you can get more motivated over time, but it actually happens. As you accomplish more, you will become more motivated. And that's how you control the resistance, right? You control the resistance by controlling your goals. And then that way, the things that you accomplish in life, you're accomplishing through your base level motivation. And so by stressing that motivation, you don't overstress it, but you come close to your base level motivation. And what that does is it allows your brain to naturally build its motivation over time. And so then you can accomplish more and more over time. So that's all I wanted to say about this. And that's why I wanted to communicate about this analogy. So till next time.